What offseason moves for Florida State would make you feel better about 2025? Because there's definitely going to have to be some things that have to happen from Mike Norvell and this program in order to change things around. I think the number one thing for me is Mike Norvell has to realize that he can't do it all. He can't take care of this. He can't take care of that, recruiting, all this kind of stuff, which I think he's Florida State's. Not sure. I think he's Florida State's right there with Alex Atkins, one of the top recruiters. David Johnson also in that realm a little bit, but he just can't do it all. And it was pretty apparent to us, Dustin, being at practices, being around the program a lot. You're there all the time. He practically runs the whole ship, and I think he needs to kind of stay true to what he's best at. And there's a lot of things that he's really good at, but it's gotten to the point where I feel like he's handling so much stuff, and it's got to be trimmed off. It's got to be trimmed off, and with that trim off, I'm leading to where Florida State has to make staff changes. But I think he's got to realize that, though, that he can't do everything and run this program. Not saying it's ran by himself, but I mean, he does carry the boat, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think maybe the biggest thing for me out of the gate is probably staff changes. Because like we talked about last week, Mike Norvell, he hasn't really fired a coach during his 5 years in Tallahassee. And you're at that point where you've got to find some new staff members. If not, I mean, completely evaluate what you've been doing at the moment. But, on offense, obviously, I think you got to take a look at Ron Dugans, Chris Thompson. We can talk about Alex Atkins. I don't think that one is probably going to happen. And you can kind of see it with the recruits hopping on board. I don't think that would be the case if the plan was for Atkins to be out after the season. But on the defensive side, obviously Randy Shannon, the linebackers there, the recruiting has struggled. The development hasn't been up to par this season. So there are some moves to look across the staff. And I want to see Mike Norvell make one of those. And then I would say the other is just they've got to be better when it comes to recruiting high school. And it's tough to say right now in October with the early signing period coming up. But, Florida State, only 12 verbal commitments at the moment. Like we talked about early in the show, there are some guys that are still shaky. And, the 12 guys you have committed, you're not guaranteed to sign them all as things stand at the moment. And there aren't a ton of other guys as far as other options out there to add to the class. So it seems like once again, Florida State, they're going to have to hit the portal to fill out a significant portion of the guys that they lose this offseason. And, as we've seen, that can be a hit for FSU, but they can also have a bad year like what they're going through at the moment.
I'm going to piggyback off what Logan said about Norvell doing too much. I think he's got to get a play caller in there. I mean, even if you go back to last year when, Florida State's 13-0 undefeated, how many times do we come on here and go, man, the play calling was kind of weird in that game. Like, why are they throwing slot fades on 3rd and 3? And we're seeing it this year with just so many consistent wide receiver screens that just go nowhere. And I think that's, a factor of him trying to do too much is he also wants to call the plays. But I think he needs to kind of take a step back and be a CEO of the entire program and not be so hands-on to the play calling. Even when Kenny Dillingham was here, wasn't the play calling split?
It was the discussion that it was split, but I don't think any of the people on the beat really leaned in that direction that Kenny. I'm sure there was definitely a tag team in preparing on game weeks, but when it came down to game days, I think it was solely on the shoulders of Norvell.
So it's just like, it's been a really frustrating offense to watch, especially given how much talent they've had. I mean, look at last year's offense that had Keon Coleman, Johnny Wilson, Trey Benson, Toa Philly, J-Trav, all these guys that are extremely talented. And at times we're coming on here going, I don't know about this offense, guys. They need to pick it up a little bit. And a lot of that goes back to play calling. And that's going to be tough to do. Obviously, Atkins is listed as offensive coordinator / offensive line coach. Do they demote him to just offensive line coach and bring in someone else? But that means you're going to have to probably let go of Tokars because most offensive coordinators are quarterbacks coaches. How would you feel about making that move? Especially like if you wanted to bring in Brendan Marion from UNLV, who's a Norvell guy. He's a quarterbacks coach over there. So you'd have to figure some kind of rotations out. I agree with D-Lou. Dugans has got to go. He should have been gone 2 years ago when he didn't bring any high school players, and I said as much. And then he bought himself some time by bringing in that transfer class with Deuce Spann and Johnny Wilson and whoever else is in that class that I'm already forgetting. Winston Wright, I think. And there was someone else.
Pittman.
It was Pittman.
Oregon.
So he bought himself some time with that, and then he got some good recruits this past year with BJ Gibson and Elijah Moore and LaWayne McCoy, but they haven't seen the field yet. And at this point, I'm not sure that they ever will. I'm sure they'll see some snaps, but it's clear that there's been zero development in that room, and it's been going on for 5 or 6 years now. No reason to hate on him. Thompson, I think, has earned himself some leeway. I think, because you brought in Landon Thomas, you brought in Amari Williams. You've got that 4-star tight end committed for next year's class. D-Luke can remind me of his name.
Chase Lofton.
There you go. You could argue that's the best 2-year recruiting window Florida State's ever had at tight end, because it's not like Florida State's ever been a huge tight end program.
Mm-hmm.
So I can understand that. Randy Shannon has been talked about enough on this podcast and on Twitter and everywhere else. Changes need to be made there. The defensive line, they got to figure something out there, whether it's moving Odell to some kind of advisor role and moving JP to strictly special teams, but the recruiting and the development's got to get much better there. Someone's got to get figured out there. I think they need to bring in more recruiting specialists on the staff because, as you just mentioned, they haven't really closed on many of their top high school prospects. There needs to be a lot of changes, at least 4, maybe 5, and that's not including general manager and some of these other specialty roles.
And that's a significant overhaul.
It is. But it's the only way I'd feel any sort of confidence for the next few years.
Yeah.